Washington's red zone offense is ready to transform in 2025.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the days. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you're getting this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button down below. Click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we post new show. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Now, Lars, we are just coming back from Washington's first practice of fall camp, so we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. We're going to take a couple of minutes to talk about the Locked On Top 100, which features 3 Huskies. We'll get to that at the end of the show because we're going to get into some injury updates, including Ryan Otton, who has medically retired. We'll talk about those in a little bit because we're going to get into some of our big takeaways from a day where there weren't a lot of pads on, or excuse me, they're not even a lot. There are no pads on for the first couple of days of practice. So it's really low stress, which led to a lot of red zone install, which, Lars, you and I kind of looked at each other and we were like, this is something that needs to improve in 2025. And with an improvement in personnel, it's ready to take that next step.
Yeah, and with the context of day one of fall camp, both you're prioritizing a problem that you had last season, and there's not a ton you can do, especially when you, as you just mentioned, you're not in pads at all. So you're not going to have any live contact, but it's still almost like a pseudo walkthrough in a way where, you know, you're getting it. That was reps in, and the understanding being a lot of them, like those fade balls we're seeing, the running backs and receiver, like it was everybody. It was like everybody was getting involved in that. It wasn't just one specific position group in the offense. And I think it's a good sign for me that Jedd's taking that seriously because, you know, he joked last season that Amber asked him harder questions than we do. And it's like, well, every time we ask you about the red zone, nothing changes and nothing improves. Really, I think Jedd was kind of knowing it had to be a full offseason, get the right complement of guys in, add some new players, and then try working that install, which again, day one, you love to see it.
Oh, absolutely. The thing that I took away from it more than that was it wasn't because obviously we can't go into a whole bunch of just like specifics in terms of what was going on, but we saw so much stuff that looked a little similar to last season, where I think this one's okay because we saw him score a touchdown off this last year, where we saw so much read option on just some of the early install. And I just think that that's going to be such a big focal point of this offense, no matter what, over the course of the coming season, because we know what Damon Williams is as an athlete and what he, and whether it be Jonah Coleman, Adam Muhammad, or Jordan Washington, whoever is in the backfield can do on plays like that. So that's something that I'm just so curious to see how much more of that is implemented this fall. And a couple other things is just, I don't want to say surprised, but really intrigued with how much we saw from Jordan Washington and that same light, because as I look at the red zone, the one thing that I reference when I talk about that touchdown that Damon scored on the read option, which came against Indiana, was something you and I were talking about that is just such a simple way to succeed in football, is getting your best athletes into space and letting them make plays with their legs. And that was something where we saw that several times in various ways with Jordan Washington. And as I think about what he can be to this offense moving forward, that's the kind of guy where you find ways to utilize him inside the 20-yard line, because he's someone who you can't let get outside the tackle box or he will beat you to the edge. And it's someone who, if you can find ways to utilize him between the tackle boxes and get an offensive lineman or two in front of him, he can still make a move and get upfield in a heartbeat. So those are a couple of things that in terms of on the ground, we didn't see that last year because, you know, when we did, it was Jonah Coleman bouncing runs to the outside, which we saw a couple times against USC. But I just feel like there are so many different things you can do when you get closer to the goal line this year, whereas last year with the offensive line that you had, you really couldn't.
Yeah, well, I mean, the offensive line is its own separate issue, but you're absolutely right in saying it. But like Jordan Washington wasn't even the same Jordan Washington last season. When he came in, he was a figure of who he is now. I think that's kind of worth noting, where we both thought he would get in last season, and then we never really saw it come to fruition. And I think it almost seemed like midway, by like mid-October, late October, it was like, yeah, I think we're just going to punt all of our Jordan Washington takes and opinions to 2025, because like you're saying, now he's actually a little bit bigger, a little more. When I saw him running through the tackles, they were doing like an inside kind of cut drill. And I think him and Reich and Moon moved the quickest. And to me, that was a surprise, where not necessarily a surprise, but just he still has that added weight and is no slower. So I think when you're talking about running between the tackles or outside, Jordan Washington absolutely is that weapon where he could flex out, could be in the backfield in the zone read. I think we even talked about last season having him and Jonah, or having Adam and him kind of lined up in the backfield. And then you have Damon in the center of it, where it's all three of them can run, or you could have Damon pass. And especially in the red zone, that creates such a mismatch for defense where you're not going to be able to cover all three of those guys, let alone then match up 11 on 11.
So let's take this conversation out wide then, because one thing I'm really interested in, we'll talk about it a little more later on. It's not necessarily a surprise, especially from some stuff we talked about last week, that Denzel Boston was on the sideline going through some limited reps. Like Jedd Fisch said, it'll be probably about a week before we see a little more from him. But in his place, Raiden Vines-Bright was the guy who stepped up. And it's something that I'm really intrigued by, because he's someone else who has that great speed and can just find ways to create mismatches in the red zone. And when I look at this group of wide receivers, something that Jedd noted during media day was that there's going to be a top 4, and then guys are going to fill in behind him. And it was just really, really interesting to see Raiden be that guy who was involved with the first team install for different periods of time, because, I look out wide and we know that Omari Evans and Rasheed Williams are going to have their contributions. We spent a lot of time talking about them. We've talked about the battle between Kevin Green and Audric Harris, what that's going to look like. And it feels like Raiden and Chris Lawson are still just very much in this mix as well. And we still think that all of those guys are going to see the field in some capacity this season. But when I look at how Raiden was involved today, lining him up in several different spots, these are all things that I wanted to see more from him in the springtime, but unfortunately he went down with an injury and we just didn't get to see much of that. So seeing where he is in fall camp, I still feel really good about saying 2 receivers are going to not redshirt and going to play a fair amount this season. And I feel more confident in saying that he's going to be one of those guys.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic where Chris Lawson was the guy in spring where we were talking, agenda every single day, it seemed like, because Raiden was hurt, so we couldn't see him. And then right at the end, like those last 5, 6, 7 practices, Raiden emerged, and you could honestly say was the MVP of. It
wasn't even that; it was like the last 2 practices.
Right. I was trying to be a little bit generous there because I couldn't remember when exactly he was like loosely practicing, and then those last 2 days, especially in the spring game, ramped it up. But again, like Jedd said after practice today, your best ability is availability, and in this case, now Raiden is the one that actually is available. And I think, to me, even though he was what, a 3-star / 4-star, it kind of depended on where you look at it in the rankings, like a guy that was a fringe forward, but really seems to be playing up to that 4 level, especially outside. Like, because you mentioned it, like Omari could play inside, outside, according to Jedd. Raiden seems like a guy today when he was catching some of those fades, I'm like, leave him outside. I don't really care at this point. Just, if that's what he does as a freshman, that's all you don't need from him.
So I disagree with that, because I just think that it's one of those things where if you're going to move Omari Evans to the slot, who's a bigger version of a similar player where he's got that same level of speed downfield, I think that having somebody like that who you can move all over the formation and just be a versatile weapon for you, it goes back to what we're talking about with the red zone, is having more guys like that can just continue to make plays for you wherever you line them up. Because, we're not talking about Denzel Boston much with this because he just wasn't out there today. That's a guy who we know is going to be a massive weapon in the red zone. We know what some of these tight ends can do as well with what Decker DeGraff was able to bring to the table last season. But when I look at a guy like Raiden, when I'm talking about creating just mismatches and getting your best athletes into space, he falls into that discussion. And it's one of those things where, if we're sitting here in week 5 and week 6 and, Raiden Vines-Bright scored on a jet sweep kind of play because they just gave him the ball and let him get into space and he was able to find the end zone. Those are the kinds of things that we didn't see enough of last season. I think because a lot in part of the offensive line not being at the same level of where it's going to be this fall. And when we talk about, again, finding success in the red zone, the offensive line is going to be such a big key to that. And this coaching staff seems so confident that's taking a step forward that I think we're going to see that reflected in Jedd Fisch's play calling as well. But Lars, we got several other takeaways from fall camp that we need to get to. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Drip Drop. If you're trying to stay on top of your routine, whether that's workouts, long days on campus, or staying focused through back-to-back classes, hydration is where it all starts. And that's where Drip Drop comes in. Drip Drop is doctor-developed and scientifically proven for fast hydration. It uses the perfect balance of sodium electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb fluids quickly, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of a leading sports drink. My go-to flavor has been Fruit Punch. I love to use it after I go play basketball because I get really dehydrated after about an hour and a half of pickup, and Drip Drop has been clutch for me, and it really has helped me avoid dehydration. Right now, Drip Drop is offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first order. Just head to dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKDOWNCollege. That's dripdrop.com, promo code LOCKDOWNCollege for 20% off. Stock up now before the heat hits hard. So, Lars, there are a couple other things that really stood out to me. The first thing was a guy we have been talking up all summer. In Dylan Robinson, Jedd Fisch was asking about some of the young guys who have just stood out, not even just through one practice, because like we said, there's not always a lot going on in that first practice or two when pads aren't on. But Dylan Robinson is a guy who we know how high this coaching staff is on him. And the first thing Jedd said was, yeah, this guy's going to be a really, really special player. And he's just been absolutely crushing it in the weight room all summer. We got out there, got to take a look at him. Two things I think were very, very true. Or three, actually. One, phenomenal mover for his size. Second thing is that size really does play. I think it was either you or our good buddy Andy Yamashita at the Seattle Times. I can't remember who. I think maybe even both of you said it to me. It was, if you take the numbers off Tacario Davis and Dylan Robinson, you wouldn't be able to tell who was who. And that was just something that I noticed during spring camp, while he was here as well, was that he just has that elite level of size. And then the third thing was he was already running with the second team defense, just like we kind of expected was going to be the case.
Yeah, it's almost the guy that you just had to finally get him on campus and then just let him cook, like let him do his thing. Because I remember I certainly said it to you when I was like, if you didn't tell me it was number 6, that it was Dylan, I would have thought it was Tacario, or and vice versa. Where you look at them, like they literally are built almost like a carbon copy of each other. And I think again, it's why it's so frustrating that Dylan wasn't an early enrollee, because we wanted to see him in spring because we know the type of caliber of player that he is. Where, yeah, he's not going to start this season, or not even, he'll crack the 2Ds potentially. I don't know how sold I am on that, just because he's a freshman. I think again, if he plays in every game, I won't. I think if he plays in every game, I won't be surprised. But again, the depth chart, worth noting for people now that we're back in the full swing of fall camp, the depth chart is subjective. So just because the guy is listed doesn't mean somebody is actually ahead of him and things like that. But I do think, again, if you see Dylan Robinson on the 4th or 5th series of a game, week 1, don't be surprised, because they need to test him early to see where he's at. And by the way, he's pretty far ahead of where we thought he was going to be.
Yeah, that's why we've been talking about him all summer. Was we thought he was already in a certain point, and it feels like the coaching staff is already happy enough with him that he's beyond whatever that may be as well, which is something I'm really excited about, because I think when you look at this corner room, one of the reasons we've been talking about him so much is there are so many questions on the depth chart behind Leroy Bryant. And it's one of the reasons we have been filling him in that spot, where everybody else is either a true redshirt freshman, where Darian Clemens and Ramon Adams, we like what they bring to the table, but they have a ways to go. Elias Johnson kind of falls into that same boat, where we like what he brings to the table, but he's got a ways to go in terms of just adding more weight to his frame. So there are still so many questions there, where having a guy like Dylan, who is already so physically ready to play, there's no harm in throwing him out there on the depth chart and just seeing what he can do, especially with this coaching staff. And something Ryan Walters told me on Tuesday, which was he's not afraid to play freshmen if he feels that, especially mentally, that they are ready to go. So I have a feeling we are going to see him a lot. And one guy who, in the same light that I'm curious about, we've talked about him for a couple of weeks now as, potential riser during fall camp, is Donovan Robinson. We didn't know a position he was going to play. He comes in listed as a safety on the online roster and everything. And then we talked Jedd Fisch today, and it's, he's already moving to linebacker. And it's someone who's listed at 6'3", 220 pounds. I don't think you or I are shocked. And I'm really excited about it. I personally think this is the best option for him.
It's not a stretch to say that Robinsons might both play 13 games this season. And again, it's what we said when he committed to Vinny Cincinnati and the staff last year, which was, you take the talent and figure out what position, whether you create the Donovan Robinson position if you want to, if you can't truly find a position for him. But we always thought he kind of would grow into that linebacker, mold, because the only thing that was going to hinder it was going to be, could he get up to that 220, 230 range? Because playing at 6'3", 210, you can pull that off. But
I wasn't concerned about that personally. I just think he has the frame to add that weight. It was just more that athleticism. Did you want to quote unquote limit it to playing linebacker, or do you want to utilize him in that CJ Christian mold of the down safety kind of role where you can have him still drop back and play in coverage? And I don't think that's out of the question either, but having a guy with that range, starting him a little bit closer to the ball just seems like the right decision here, because especially when you just look at that depth chart, like it was nice to see Jacob Manu and Zedris Rainey-Saleh on the field today, but I just look at that depth chart and still think that there are questions there. And if Donovan can, I don't want to say jump any of those guys, but if he can just prove himself during fall camp as just the incredible athlete that we've seen at that position, there's nothing keeping him from, at the very least, playing on special teams, like you said.
And I think, special teams is kind of the easiest access route for him, but I think pairing him with Ryan Otton is a great, tandem for those two because of the body type, like you mentioned. But also, I think it's a benefactor of, Rylan Dillon flexing at safety, where I think if that's going to be your freshman safety, you're not going to burn both him and Donovan. So it's better to push Donovan closer to the ball. Let's be honest, when you go back and watch his tape, doesn't he play more natural, closer to the ball anyways? Where I would not list him as an outside linebacker in any stretch of the imagination, but a guy who could find his way off the edge in a handful of situations, but a guy that just knows how to hit the hole, knows where to find the ball. And then obviously I think then you have like a special teams like, fumble recovery or run, not today at practice, but back in high school on his highlight tape or something, where I just remember him making tons of plays on special teams. So that's the easiest, obvious route for a freshman to go. But again, there's nothing limiting Dylan from playing all 13 games or 12 games. Like the only thing that would do it would be somehow if Jacob is cleared by, let's say, next week, and Jedd just
which sounds like it could be the case too, though.
And that's the weird caveat, but I think that's why it's so imperative for Donovan to start at linebacker now, so they get him the most important reps early on in fall camp, and then assess from there. Okay, do we want to choose, not rushing Donovan, but then kind of conserving Jacob for that 26 season? Because again, you're in a win-win position with talent, even though one's a junior, senior, and one's a true freshman coming in. But by the way, they're not comparison in terms of equal talent right now. Obviously, Jacob does have more experience, and I would take him over Donovan. But my word, like Donovan's catching up quickly more than people give him credit for.
Lars, what else stood out to you today?
I mean, the interesting thing was for me, like when you mentioned a little bit earlier, talk about the tight end room. Like I'm just trying to figure out which freshman is going to pop, because I saw a lot of Austin Timmons today. Baron Naone coming in, obviously shout out to your baseball fandom, coming in, after, enrolling in June. So I wonder how quickly can he catch up, because, with, what the news we'll talk about next segment, just there seems to be that somebody's going to step up of the two freshmen. Austin provides the most intrigue. Baron seems to be the most sure, ready guy. Like, if you need a third down tight end, either as a fullback or whatever, Baron might be that guy just by his size. But the dynamic in that room really is starting to intrigue me.
So I talked with Jordan Paopao on Tuesday at Media Day about Baron Naone. And one of the things he told me was he was really impressed with where he came in terms of knowledge of the playbook and everything in regards to where he needed to be mentally already. And there's still certain things that you need to, you can't feel out until you get out there in pads, especially in terms of blocking and the physicality of the game and different things like that. But I still lean that way in terms of if we're going to see one of those guys play early, because I look at Austin, I think he's a really high upside guy. Like you and I absolutely loved his tape when he committed, obviously, friend of the pod, we got to have him on and everything. But I look at where Austin is right now. And I think it's one of those things where his film showed a lot of being the best athlete in space, which is not a bad thing. That's a really good thing. That's one of the things you look for when you watch high school film, especially at the tight end position. I feel like Sam Villadol is the same kind of player in the 26 class, where it's just, he is a really, really good athlete. You give him the ball and you let him run in space. And that's what a lot of schools are looking for. And you develop the rest of those things later. It's because it's, he's running. Oh, he's also 6'5", 240. This is great. We can make all this work. And I feel like that's the case with Austin, where you can slow play a guy like that a little bit in the same way that, another Oregon guy, to just continue that trend here, and Charlie Kroll from last year's class, where it was a little bit of the opposite, where I think he was more of a blocker first because he was just so advanced in that role. And I think that's something where we didn't get to see him out there today at practice. It seems like he's still recovering from the torn ACL he suffered last fall. So I look at where those two guys are right now, and I don't think either of them are going to burn their red shirt at this point in time. but I would put Barron a little bit ahead of Austin just in terms of what their outlook from high school has been to where they are now. I think Austin's probably more advanced in terms of the playbook, but that's something I agree that I want to keep a close eye on as well, because there are so many just like different variables with that position. And also with the news coming out about Ryan Otton could lead to Washington taking another tight end in the 26th class. Lars, obviously the unfortunate news that Jedd Fisch shared with us on Wednesday is that tight end Ryan Otton, a former 4-star recruit from Tumwater, Washington, obviously the younger brother of Cade Otton, has medically retired. And as unfortunate as this is, I know this isn't necessarily a shock to most fans because over the last couple of years, he hasn't been able to stay on the field, which is just really sad to talk about because coming out of high school, everybody knew what kind of talent that was and just what he brought to the table, and just not being able to get on the field is really unfortunate.
Yeah, and every time we saw him, it almost seemed like we couldn't figure out what the injury was. I mean, there were a couple that we ended up figuring out, but there seemed to just be some where it was just maybe body wear and tear or just body, whatever. I could think we don't want to speculate, but it's just like, it's good to see that he's still able to find something after football. The one thing that does intrigue me with Ryan is, I don't know if you or somebody else in this, where he said, is Ryan going to, join the program in any way, shape, or form? And Jedd said, well, that's up to Ryan. Well, yeah. Dylan Morris joined Kalen DeBoer at Alabama. I'm wondering, does Ryan go elsewhere? Because I really think there's something with the Otton name that is synonymous, not just because of Cade, but like you talk about Sid being a legend in the state, the family going through so much. Like Ryan belongs in Washington and in this program in some way, shape, or form.
Well, so because like we can talk about how that relates to Shea Kendall as well, the quarterback who's also going to be missing the season with an injury and is going to stay on as a student assistant, as Jedd Fisch told us. I think this is one of those things, though, where sometimes people just need to take that step back, and that's never a bad thing. And it's one of those situations where, obviously the game you love and you've played for so long, you haven't been able to stay on the field for this would be his 4th year in the program. Like that certainly has to be heartbreaking at the very least. So I look at that and I think and I just think about what Jedd Fisch said, where it's, if he needs some time to step away from the game and collect himself and figure out what else he might want to do outside of football, like that certainly is an option there as well. And speaking of Shea Kendall, it's something where, it's always unfortunate to see somebody go down for the season with an injury, but I also think it's cool to have a guy like that around the program, because when Jedd brought him in last season, it was, this is interesting. You needed a 3rd scholarship quarterback. I know this guy, saw the field for a couple of starts at Northern Colorado, but we didn't necessarily expect him to see the field in, advanced capacity. And we didn't expect that this year either, because you brought in Kai Horton for that reason, to be a, 5th-year senior backup to Damon Williams, to just have someone who can come in and run the offense effectively, has done it before, and everything like that. Having a guy like Shea stay around the program, I like this decision by both parties here, really. Yeah,
because again, you remember it came from, I think, Long Beach Poly.
That's right.
I was going to say, because it always throws me off. You don't think he's a Long Beach Poly guy than he was. But yeah, it's always good to keep those California guys on the West Coast in the program. Same thing with Fatu Taylor, where he stayed around the program as a Poly guy. You always want some of those guys, and clearly Jedd can never have an assistant quarterback coaches, where you got JP, Jimmy, Jedd being the ringleader, and now Shea. Like, anytime you can kind of have that added voice in the room, like that really brings the transfer full circle, where it never really made sense to me, except in this capacity, where it's like, if you're doing it for life after football and see yourself getting into coaching, some of what Dylan talked about under Kalen, whereas, I really want to get into coaching. And I think we didn't get a chance to speak with Shea, so we never knew that. But from everything that we kind of gleaned from that situation, that was the only way that it made sense. And now you have, like you said, you have Kai in there, so you have the stable veteran. But it's great that Shea's also going to be able to help that quarterback room, because you do have 2 freshmen who are going to need some time, to be worked with as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I think we need to bring up here before we move on is, I feel like this is going to become a common theme of the fan base. And, we have everydayers who we love all of you. There are some people who are a little bit quicker to hit the panic button on certain things than others. And I feel like that's just true across fans in all sports. That's why I want to say I'm not taking a shot at anybody or anything. This is just how it works sometimes. Denzel Boston. I'm sure there are people who are going to say, well, he wasn't out there. He was, running, going through drills and different things, just not working with the team after spring practice. Some people are going to say, is it time to hit the panic button? I say no, but I want to pose this question to you. Is there going to be a certain point where, let's say, because Jedd Fisch, again, like I said earlier, said it's going to be just about a week before he gets out on the field with everybody else. Is there a point where, let's say it's August 14th and Denzel still hasn't participated in any contract drills? Are you going to hit the panic button then?
No, because he knows the offense
I
out and out. And there's no reason, like Omari, I'd be a little concerned. You go, anybody not named Denzel, because Denzel proved himself last season in this offense with and without Damon. And there's no reason to risk a setback or you don't, respectfully, you don't gain anything from Denzel practicing the first week of fall camp. Again, maybe alignment because he's still out there, still helping the younger players. He was with Raiden Vines-Bright and a few other guys that were in the freshman class, kind of just talking them through the drills and things like that when they were going through 11s and things like that. So he's still very much a part of, practice and things like that. But if he has no pads on until, I was going to say August 17th. If you had said August 17th, if he doesn't make it through fall camp without practicing, I'm like, I don't care. It means he's ready to go by the start of game week. And by the way, who's your first opponent?
Right. It's UCLA. Colorado State.
I didn't mean to say each other. Colorado State. But the point is, you're not worried about that opening season. You're not going against Ohio State or a big marquee matchup where you need everybody dialed in early. That's one where you can kind of work him back so he's able to be there when you come to November and making that potential playoff push.
Yeah, no, that's completely fair, and that's why I posed the question, because I feel the same way. Where I'm sure people are going to look at it and say, well, it was posed as a minor cleanup surgery, and now he's 6-7 months removed from that. So I'm in the same boat. I just wanted to make sure we posed that question because I'm sure there are people who are going to ask that, but I agree completely because it's about making sure one of your best players, one of your 2 preseason All-Americans is ready by the time the season rolls around. So speaking of preseason All-Americans, Lars, we here at the Locked On Network, we decided to vote on the top 100 players in college football. And it was really cool that 3 Washington Huskies were posed on the list. We proposed a couple other guys. Damon Williams was one of them. He didn't get enough votes, which, I can't say is overly shocking when he's only started 2 games, but we know where he's probably going to be at this list at the end of the season. So let's run through this real fast. We got a wonderful handy dandy graphic here where Denzel slots in as the highest player among Washington's 3 on the list at number 52. It's great that they all just line up in order to. Then 10 spots below him is running back Jonah Coleman, another preseason All-American. And then 10 spots below him at number 72 is cornerback Tacario Davis. So is there anything that just immediately jumps out to you by having all 3 of these guys on the list?
By the end of the season, we're going to look back at this and say all 3 are criminally underrated because all 3, I believe, have the chance to be top 50 guys on this list. Jonah seems like the guy where he's that 40 to 50 just because running backs can, be varied and skewed. But I think Jonah, I'm watching him up close today. I was like, 40 might be too low here at this point. And so I think all 3 of those guys, that's, fair from an honest, national perspective, because we're adding some content. It's the whole network. It's not, we didn't get any special votes or anything like that. So a lot of people still don't know about what Jonah can do, especially given Jedd's first year at 6 and 7. Nobody was really clamoring for that. Denzel was always kind of just known as the guy. And I think Tacario at 72, I feel like should be at least a top 60, 50 guy at the very least.
So full disclosure from me, I put all 3 of these guys in my top 40. I think I had Damon inside my top 50 as well when I did submit my ballot because I wanted to make sure that, they were ranked properly and I knew I'd be the high man on all of the local guys. Yeah. Call me a homer or whatever. This is what I believe about all of them. Jonah is ranked. I want to talk about Jonah for a second because he's ranked as the number 5 running back in the nation, according to our list here. And I think that fits very, very well because, we look at some of the guys above him, obviously the top 2 being Jeremiah Love, who's ranked as the number 4 player in college football, and Nicholas Singleton, who came in second at number 25. I really like where Jonah sits because, I talked about it for our unveiling show. I feel like, as you said, he's still underrated. And if he climbs 20, 30 spots by the end of the season, I'm not going to be surprised because of just how efficient he is and can be and how some of these advanced metrics line up for him with 67 missed tackles last season, 833 yards after contact. These are things that if he can continue to stay healthy this season, maybe not get as many carries, but still produce in the same light, I wouldn't be shocked if he is a top 40 player by the end of the year.
We can bring this full circle. It just hit me. Jonah gets more carries in the red zone. Adam gets between the 20. There's your split. Where Jonah gets less carries, Adam and Jonah still get the production, and UW actually benefits because you now have that threat in the red zone. because as you've been hitting home quietly the entire show, the offensive line is much improved. So I think all of those three things work together to say, if Jonah doesn't end up as a top 50 player, I have questions. Like I truly have questions at that point, where even in a limited, reduced capacity, Jonah's still going to average 4 or 5 yards a carry. Jonah's still going to probably have 900 to 1,100 yards. The question is going to be, can he cheat like Cam Davis did a couple of years ago and load up on those red zone touchdowns?
All the 1-year touchdowns.
Again, you call it stat padding, call it whatever. I mean, you think Doak Walker voters are going to be like, oh, wow, they were all, 20,
no, look at Blake Corum a few years ago. How many of those touchdowns came inside the 5-yard line? No, that's a really great point. So before we get out of here, I want to touch on just one more guy here. I want to take a second to talk about Tacario Davis, because we spent a lot of time talking about Jonah as a riser. I really do believe that nationally, Tacario Davis could be the biggest riser on this list. If you want to check out the full list, it's on our social media pages. It's everywhere at Locked On, like truly everywhere. We've been trying to pump this out because it's been so much fun to do this. But Tacario, that was my biggest takeaway looking at this list, was just how much I think he can rise this year. And I've been firmly on the train of, I think he can be the first the first cornerback off the board in the 2026 NFL draft, now that he's reunited with John Richardson, from what this Ryan Walters scheme is going to ask him to do. And I think putting him in here at 72 is a nice homage to the kind of player he's been over the last couple of seasons, but it also just shows exactly what he told us in the spring, that he knows how much room there is for him to grow, both physically and mentally. And, it all just lines up perfectly with his goal of being an All-American this year.
And theoretically got that chip on, we hate it, but chip on your shoulder of having a down year last season at Arizona, where you're not, okay, you didn't have the same, 16, 17 PBUs that he had as a sophomore under John Richardson. Right. So again, that you hit the nail on the head. That pairing of Ryan Walters and John Richardson is going to be criminal. We're going to look back at that at the end of the year and be like,
it's a match made in heaven, truly.
And again, I just hope they stay together for 2 or 3 years, because, man, they could actually go on a run with that young talent too. But it's going to start with Tacario and Ephesians this year, resetting that bar, going back to the DBU thing, the mantra that John Richardson always references. Like, you have all the weapons and tools to do it. Go do it in 25.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank all everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout fall camp, so please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, we're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day, so please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell, so you never miss when we post a new video. You have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.